Here is something almost everyone believes about progress. That as the world grew richer, we all got to work less. It sounds obvious. It is also, for most of history, exactly backwards. Because if you charted the hours of the average worker over the last 7 centuries, you would not draw a line sliding gently downward. You would draw a mountain. For hundreds of years, the hours climbed, higher under the machines than they ever were under the plough, until a working life meant 3,000 hours a year and more. And then, only recently, and only because people fought for it, the mountain came down. This is the story of how long we have actually worked. This is the long series. Start at the bottom of the mountain in the Middle Ages. The line you're watching begins low and uncertain. The economist Juliet Schor famously estimated that a 13th century English peasant worked around 1,600 hours a year. Other estimates run higher, past 2,000. Historians still argue about the exact figure, and you should treat it as a rough guess, not a measurement. But almost everyone agrees on the shape. Pre-industrial work was slower, more seasonal, and broken up far more than ours. You worked when there was light and work to do, and you stopped when there wasn't. The reason the medieval year could hold so few working hours was the calendar itself. Work was task-based, not clock-based, and it was riddled with days off. Saints' days, church feasts, holy days, fairs, and the long dead weeks of winter could remove a third or more of the year from labor. There was even a tradition called Saint Monday, the widely honored habit of simply not working on Mondays to recover from Sunday. Their poverty was real, and their work was hard. But the modern idea that a poor past meant relentless, year-round toil is not quite true. What they were missing was not effort, it was the clock. The first thing that pushed the line up wasn't a factory, it was desire. From the 15 and 1600s onward, new goods came within reach of ordinary people. Sugar, tea, tobacco, cotton, cheap crockery. Historians call what happened next the industrious revolution. Households chose to work more days and more hours to buy the things they now wanted. The holy days began to thin out. St. Monday came under attack. Before a single steam engine changed the world, the working year in England was already growing longer because people were trading their time for a new kind of life. And then the evidence gets hard. The historian Hans Joachim Voth reconstructed the English working year from an unusual source, court records, where thousands of witnesses were asked what they had been doing at the hour of a crime. Add up those ordinary hours and the climb is undeniable. Around 1750, the typical worker put in roughly 2,800 hours a year. By the early 1800s, it had risen to around 3,300. In 2 generations, people added the equivalent of an extra working day to every single week. Not by choice now, but by discipline. Because this is where the machine arrives, and it does not arrive to save time. It arrives to seize it. The factory ran on the clock, not the sun, and it ran all day. The bell, the gate, the overseer, the fine for lateness, these turned time itself into something an employer owned. By 1870, full-time workers across the industrial world were putting in more than 3,000 hours a year, weeks of 60, even 70 hours for men, women, and children alike. This was the summit of the mountain. Never before, and never since, have human beings worked so many hours in a year. The richest societies on Earth had produced the longest working lives in history. So how did we get the hours back? Not as a gift. Every hour was fought for. Workers organized, struck, and marched under a single radical demand. 8 hours labor, 8 hours rest, 8 hours for what we will. Slowly, the law followed. Limits on child labor. The 10-hour day, then the 8. The Saturday half-day that eventually became the weekend, a word that barely existed before the 1800s. Around the turn of the 20th century, the mountain finally tipped over, and the line that had climbed for centuries began at last to fall. And fall it did, further and faster than the climb. Across the 20th century, annual hours in the rich world dropped by a third, in some places by half. In France, the full-time working year fell from over 3,000 hours in 1870 to under 1,500 by the year 2000. Paid holidays appeared and then grew. Retirement was invented. The share of your whole life spent working shrank dramatically. The machines that had first stolen our time were, in the end, productive enough to give a great deal of it back once we insisted. But look closely at today, and the single line splits apart. There is no one modern number. A worker in Germany now averages around 1,340 hours a year. In the United States, closer to 1,800. In Mexico, over 2,200, still near the old industrial peak. Nearly 900 hours a year separate the top of that list from the bottom. And even within one country, the average hides everything that matters: the person working 2 jobs and the person who can't get enough hours at all. A national average of working time is, as ever, a single number standing in for millions of very different days. So here is the shape, end to end: a low, uncertain valley of holy days and seasons, a long climb driven first by desire and then by the machine to a peak of 3,000 hours no one should envy, and a hard-won descent, paid for in strikes and laws that gave us the weekend, the holiday, and the very idea of time off. Read the shape of the whole mountain, not the single number, and remember that behind every average is someone still climbing it. We've now measured what a day's work bought, what bread cost, how long you had to live, and how hard you had to work for it. Next time, the roof over your head and 7 centuries of what shelter cost. This is the Long series. Subscribe, and we'll keep reading the long